Welcome everyone. As Evelyn said, we are going to talk about optimizing lighting in Real 5 today. This is the workshop overview. We're going to start with some foundations. It's not going to be just theory for the sake of theory. I'm going to explain some different options you will have for Unreal, and it's decisions you're going to have to make depending on your project needs, and all of them will affect performance. After that, I will show you a little bit some tools that Unreal have to measure performance. And after that, we'll measure performance in a project I have set up, and we will go through some optimization techniques. So the first decision you have to make if you start a new project is, do you want dynamic lighting or baked lighting? Baked lighting is still supporting Unreal. It's not the default method, but it's still usable. It works, and it might suit you. The main things about it is this pre-computed, so you don't have to do. It's much cheaper, so you don't have to do any calculations at runtime while the game is running. But that causes that it's static, which means if you open a door or you break a wall, the light won't come and will not react to any gameplay or any movement. And also, all this information is stored in light maps, so that's to be considered. And then, what's dynamic lighting? Well, as the name says, it's dynamic, so it's calculated in real time, and there's nothing is pre-computed. It is completely responsive to anything you do. If you move the lighting will move. If you open a door, the light will come in, and you don't have any light maps to worry about. So the pros and cons for baked lighting, the main pros are it's cheap because you do all the calculations before you run the game. The quality is great if you can afford to have enough high resolution enough in the light maps, and it's stable because you don't have to do any optimization or cut corners to get in performance, to get it in budget. So it looks more stable. There's no flickering, no noise, that kind of things that you can see with Lumen sometimes. But the cons is, as I mentioned, it's static, so it doesn't respond to anything that happened in the game. Have a higher memory cost because you have to store all these light maps, and also it's time consuming because every time you do something, it's time consuming for the lighting artist because every time you do any adjustments, you have to bake, and that will take time. If you want to do a quality bake, a wood quality bake, it's going to take hours probably, so you won't see your changes properly until next day. And also it's time consuming for the environment team because they have to work on all the light maps. So yeah, it's an option, but yes, it's downsides. And then the dynamic lighting, the process is dynamic, it's responsive. Everything you change, you will see the changes immediately. Useless memory because you don't have to worry or store those light maps. And it's a faster iteration, again, because it's dynamic. So everything you change, you can see it immediately. You can compare really quickly between one version and the next one. So it makes the process of creating much faster and easier. The cons are, it's much more expensive because you calculate all the lighting in real time and runtime. So during the game, you have to budget some milliseconds for that calculations. And this is because it's dynamic, it can also be unstable because sometimes you have to reduce the quality or the amount of rays you use to calculate it. So it's prone to have some more noise or some more flickering on the lights, that kind of things. And also tend to be lower fidelity. Like we will see later, for example, shadows tend to be more grainy. For example, global illumination is less accurate sometimes. So we'll see that later. This is another thing that probably most of you are familiar with, and it's the type of lights in Unreal, the 5 of them. But I want to talk more about the cost of them, because probably some people don't know what light is more expensive than which one. The skylight is pretty cheap, for example, because it's not really a proper light. It just used mesh distance fields to calculate some kind of mesh distance field ambient occlusion. So it's fairly cheap, and you don't need really to worry much about it. The directional light, which is the light that it's just like it's mainly used for the sun. It just throws like parallel rays. This one is the most difficult to know how expensive it's going to be, because it depends on your game or your project. It depends how big is the map, how many objects it's hitting, how many movable things are in the map. So I'll show you later how you can optimize it a little bit. And then the spotlight. This is the best light, best performance, easier to control, pretty cheap. You can almost have not as many as you want, but you don't need to worry too much about them. Then the point light, which is fairly expensive if it's shadow casting. I'm talking about shadow casting lights in all of these cases, because if the lights are not casting shadows, are much cheaper. So the point light is fairly more expensive than the spotlight, and it's mainly because it's like if you have 6 spotlights together. Like if you think a cube and you have one spotlight in each face of the cube, that's what creates a point light. So that's what makes it more expensive. And then we have the rect light, which is not really, it's really expensive. And the main difference is, well, although the lights, spotlight and point light, like traces rays from one point, this one traces rays from the whole surface of the rectangle, which means it's more expensive. And it's mainly designed to be used in cinematics or movies, that kind of things. In games, it's kind of too expensive to be used most of the times. And now let's talk about Lumen. Probably all of you have seen this video. It's from the presentation of Unreal Engine 5, but the thing is a really good representation of what Lumen does, which we're going to talk about it now. Is that Lumen is the default Unreal Engine 5 lighting system. It's also it's fully dynamic. It's also like a all-in-one solution, because it's used for global illumination and reflections, because it uses some of the things it calculated. It reuses it for the other one. It supports software and hardware ray tracing. We'll talk about that later too. Include the skylight, which is a big difference with Unreal 4, because a skylight was already a light in Unreal 4. But the main difference here is like it's taken into account by Lumen. So for example, if you're in an interior and you have a skylight and there's no windows or any opening to the skylight, the interior is going to be dark. While in Unreal 4, or if you're not using Lumen, it leaks inside the interior. So the brighter the skylight, the brighter the interior, no matter if there's openings or not. And another new feature that is quite useful is that it takes into account emissive materials. So you have a emissive screen or wherever, it will emit light for free, which is not happening if you're not using Lumen or in Unreal 4. And now I mentioned global illumination, but I didn't explain what it is. So let's talk about it. Global illumination is the way we calculate, or we recreate how lighting works in real life. If we just have directional light, in this case, or a direct lighting, not directional, like a direct lighting, you just have like the areas that are hit by the light are lit, but everything else is dark because there's no lighting bouncing around. So that's what global illumination does. It's also called indirect lighting, bounce lighting. So this is basically what the difference between the two screenshots is, what global illumination does. When you are starting a project in Unreal, you have to decide what global illumination method you want to use. You don't really need to use Lumen. You don't need it. That's one thing, important thing. That's why I'm talking about all these things. You don't really need to use the latest. It all depends on the project you're working on and the needs you have. For example, if you have like a mainly outdoor game, you might get away with not using GI, and you just use a skylight and a directional light to kind of fake it. This is, for example, in this scene, there's no GI at all, and it still looks okay. Then another option, if you have a bit more budget, you can use a screen space GI. It's supported in Unreal 5 too. And what it does is just use screen space information to kind of fake bounce lighting. You can see the difference here. Mainly, everywhere a little bit. The problem is it relies on screen space information. So when you move the camera, you're going to have these occlusion artifacts, and the things that are facing away from the camera are not going to get any effect. And then we have Lumen. I boosted a little bit here so you can see more difference. But as you can see, it's a big difference. And you can also see what I mentioned about the skylight. For example, here with no Lumen, the interior in the right is being lit by the skylight, even if there's no windows or the windows are not big enough, while with Lumen is blocking out that light and make it look more realistic. But at the same time, you have to pay the price for using Lumen. So this is one of the decisions you have to make. And this is a comparison of all the methods. Then if you decide to go for Lumen, we're going to just look into Lumen because it's the best solution. I mean, the best solution, the best looking solution, and the more advanced. So you have two options. You can use software Lumen and hardware Lumen. For hardware Lumen, you need to have hardware. Your graphic card has to support hardware ray tracing, so you have to have a specific hardware for this. While software Lumen can run in any graphic card, really, if it's powerful enough. I have here these two images that I would like you to guess which one is which, because sometimes the difference are not really big if you just don't look into them. And I'll tell you in a second which one is which. So, as you can see here, software, I don't know if you guessed right or not, software is the left, hardware is right. And you can tell by how, for example, the lighting on top of this window is more accurate. This one, hardware is blocking, these curtains are blocking the lighting, while this one are not. Hardware is also blocking more light reaching this wall. The reflections are more accurate. So there's some difference there. And the main difference, software, Lumen traces all the light traces against mesh distance fields, which is like a low resolution representation of every mesh, while hardware Lumen traces against the real geometry. That's why, for example, here, the curtains, probably the mesh distance field for the software version is not high resolution enough because it's really thin geometry. So that's why it's letting the lighting pass, while hardware Lumen is blocking it. And also it's bouncing light back to the window, you can see here. Also, it's being used by the reflections. For example, if you look at the reflections in the bed on the right here, they are more accurate with hardware Lumen. Or Lumen is also blocking, like the resolution of the reflections here is blocking, it looks more accurate to the real reflected area. So you want to use hardware Lumen, you have to go to the ray settings, rendering, and then check these two boxes, use hardware ray tracing when available, and support hardware ray tracing. And that will automatically turn everything on. Then I wanted to talk about these other two options because they affect Lumen. relate to Lumen, and they affect performance or quality. So depending on how much budget you have or how the performance in your game is looking, you might want to look into them. The first one is right lighting mode, and this is mainly for reflections. So this one, what surface cache does is it traces reflections from the nanite fallback meshes. While if you change it to heat lighting, it will trace against the real geometry, so reflections are going to look better, but it's more expensive. And then software ray tracing mode, you can change it from detail tracing to global tracing. And in this case, it's the opposite. Like detail tracing is the most accurate lighting. This version is just for software Lumen, this option. And if you change it to global tracing, it's going to be less accurate. The main difference is detail tracing traces GI against the mesh distance fields, while global tracing just traces against the global distance field, which is less accurate. So you are having trouble getting into budget, you can check these options. As I said, Lumen also encompass global illumination and reflections. So now I would like to show you the reflections. In this case, we have three options for reflections in Unreal 5. We have Lumen, we have screen space reflections, and we have reflection probes. So this is Lumen. Their reflections look generally great. And the most important thing is they don't rely on any screen space information or there's any misalignment problems. So for example, as you can see here, the reflections look, you can see the buildings here and here. They align perfectly, and you can see them even if they are not in the screen. While in the next method, which is screen space reflections, that's not the case. Reflections look great, and they are much cheaper than Lumen reflections, but they have problems. I also want to mention that Lumen reflections still rely on some screen space reflections. Like for the things that are in screen, it uses screen space reflections, but for things that are off screen, it uses Lumen reflections. So screen space reflections look great, are cheaper, but have problems because they just use the information they have in the screen. So in this case, or any other case, when the objects are not in the screen, they are not get reflected. So you will have these occlusion artifacts at the edges of the screen. Or for example, here we are losing half of the buildings because they are not in the frame. Also, if you have like a lake or a sea, something like that, and you have things moving in front of reflected objects, you will have, for example, if there's a boat going in front of a mountain or something like that, you will have a frame around the object, the boat, without reflections because it cannot see the screen, it cannot see the mountain behind. And another option, this is old school, but still works, is reflection probes. This is like baked lighting for reflections. Everything is pre-computed. The problem is you have to place the probes, which is more manual work, and also requires more memory because you have to store those cube maps somewhere. And also another problem is they are difficult to align. Because, for example, I did this example here, for example, because this probe is perfectly aligned with the camera. So you can see the buildings are perfect. And even if I move the camera and you cannot see, if I move the camera down and you cannot see the buildings, you will still see the buildings, not reflection. The problem is you almost never are able to align the reflection probe this fine with the camera. So for example, here in the right, I just moved the reflection probe for like 2 meters, and you can see already the reflection doesn't match up with the buildings. They are like moved to the side, So this is a problem because in most cases you cannot align the probe properly with the camera. But you can also combine them with screen speed reflections. So you have like a fallback reflection cube, reflection probe, and so when things are not visible, when things are not in the screen, you will see the probe. When things are in the screen, you will see screen speed reflections. So yeah, if you don't have really a lot of reflective things in your game, you might not really need Lumen reflections, and you will save a lot of good performance. This is a comparison. As you can see here, they're more subtle. I don't know, probably it's the angle of the camera, but the screen space reflection look almost as good as Lumen or probes. All the quality of them are pretty good. They just have downsides and upside. And now let's talk about shadow options. In Unreal 5, we have 3 methods, although we are going to focus just on 2. The default one and the best looking one is virtual shadow maps, or VSMs, which is virtualized shadow maps. That's what it stands for. And it's basically nanite for shadows. It's like a really big shadow resolution. It's like you have like 16 by 16K shadow map that you can use. It's really high quality, but they are really expensive. Also, it supports shadow fall off. So, for example, if the shadow is closer to the object, it's going to be sharper than if it's further away. I'll show you some examples later. And then we have cascade shadow maps, which is the method that was used in Unreal 4. And it's basically LOD shadows. You have 3 or 4 shadow maps that get the same resolution, but they cover more the further away from the camera. So the quality of the shadows is better when they're closer to the camera than further away. The quality is alright. It gets much worse with distance, and it's cheaper than virtual shadow maps. So you're using nanite, using virtual shadow maps make a lot of sense because they can show all that detail that you have in the meshes. But if you're not using high quality high resolution meshes, or you don't have like really long distances that you can see, like your game is basically indoors, and you don't have really a lot of high detail meshes, cascade shadow maps might make sense for you. And then we have ray trace shadows. I just want to mention there's an option. It's the highest quality. It's the most expensive. You need hardware ray tracing for these, but I always have problem when I use them. So I won't use them as an example. I just want you to know that it's an option. And this is another test for you, so you can guess which one is which, as we did with global illumination. I have this one and this one, so you can probably guess which one is which. And the left one was BSMs, and the right one was cascade shadow maps. And you can tell by the resolution, for example, here or here, and you can see that in the distance, these shadows still hold pretty well, while these ones are looking blurrier here. This is more acute here. For example, this tower here doesn't have like some blobs for shadows, while these one have really high definition shadows still, or these things here. So yeah, that's the main difference. And as you can see, as I was mentioned before, cascade shadow maps are blurred equally everywhere by default, while virtual shadow maps are much more realistic because they behave realistically. They have much more resolution, as you can see here, and they are sharper the closer they are to the object. They are more blurred the further away, but they also have their problems. As I mentioned, the dynamic lighting is less accurate than baked lighting. As you can see, the further away they are, the bigger the penumbra and the more noisy the shadow is. So those are the trade-offs. One thing we will look into this when in the practical part, but I want to mention before, we also the way virtual shadow maps behave and change resolution is based in these clip maps. So you can see here these circles. The green circle means these are the higher resolution shadow maps. Purple one is the second one, and so on. The thing is, this is similar to Cascade shadow maps, but this is much more, it's higher resolution and much more finer gradient, so you can barely tell that you are going from one clip map to the next one, while in Cascade shadow maps, it's really clear when you are crossing the line. And the way, this is another comparison between Cascade shadow maps and virtual shadow maps, but I wanted to mention these pages, which is how Unreal stored these virtual shadow maps. Every little square is like a little texture, or big texture, depending. They are 128 by 228 pixels. So as you can see, they match the clip maps. So the first clip map, these little squares are smaller. The second clip map are bigger, and so on. So you have an idea of how high resolution is this. This is how Cascade shadow map works. You have these 3 textures, and that's it. While here you have all these little textures that capture all the details. And that's all the theory for now. I just want to talk about these couple of tools that we're going to take a look later in the practical part. One is, they are both in Unreal. They are fine. They are easy to use, and you can use them pretty easily. One is a stat unit or stat unit graph. It tells you how long is your frame taking to render, what part is taking how long. For example, if the game calculations are taking longer, GPU, how much memory you're using, what is the resolution you're rendering, how many draw calls. It's pretty useful. And then we have the GPU visualizer, which is more in detail, because the stat unit just tells you that you are under budget or over budget, but doesn't tell you where. And that's where you can check the GPU visualizer, and you have more finer detail to see what is causing the bottleneck, or what is too expensive, or what is in budget. One of the things you have to do before anything is really decide your budget. Usually Unreal or Epic advise to leave 4 milliseconds for Lumen if you are aiming for 60 frames, or 80 milliseconds if you are going for 30 frames. Another useful thing, before you think the lighting is the problem, you can identify if the GPU is the bottleneck or the CPU. Because if it's a GPU, it might be lighting related. If it's the CPU, it's not really likely that it's lighting related. And I usually use these to see if my changes are making any difference. I don't really look into how much, but it's it gives you a good idea of how impactful your changes are being. Because usually the way you want to measure this is you don't want to measure this in editor, you want to measure this in a build. But that's more work and time consuming. So today we're just going to look at it in editor. In editor is less accurate because there's some editor stuff going on in the background all the time. So performance is probably going to be better in a build, but for making an idea if your changes are working or not, this is good enough. If you want something more advanced, there's some external tools that will give you even more detail than the GPU visualizer. You have Microsoft Pix, RenderDoc, or NVIDIA Insight, for example. We're not going to go into them because then we need a workshop. But for example, for Microsoft Pix, Ben Cloward have a pretty good tutorial in his YouTube channel. So if you want to take a look at, that's pretty good. Now, well, before we go to the practical part, I wanted to mention also that usually there's no free performance. Most of the time you have to do trade-offs. So you want to get better performance, you have to sacrifice quality. That's how it is. I'm not sure if you can see the frame rate here because it's pretty small. But in the left one, we have 42 frames per second, while in the right one, we have 66. And that's mainly because the quality here is much better than here. I don't know if you can see the detail in the shadows. This one is virtual shadow maps. This is cascade shadow maps. This is using hardware Lumen. This is using software Lumen. Reflections are also much better. GI is more accurate, you can see here, but it has a performance cost. So yeah, usually there's no free gains in performance. You have to sacrifice something. And that's everything, theory. I'm going to tell you what we're going to look at before moving to Unreal, and then we'll take a look there. First of all, I want to mention shadow caching, because we're going to look at it. I don't want to talk much about it now, but this is how you can optimize your directional light that I mentioned before. Then we're going to look at the overlapping and number of lights in your scene. This is the most critical part for a lighting artist. And then distance cooling, because you don't want to render lights you cannot see. We're going to go a little bit over megalights, but I won't go into really in depth because there's another workshop in Beyond Extend channel that you can just check. It's just about megalights. We're going to take a look also how to improve performance in reflections for Lumen. Scalability settings. We are going to see what effect they have in the game, but I just wanted to show you that the cinematic quality scalability is mainly for movies, so movie render queue or cinematics, something like that. Probably more like
Every could be set to a higher.
Epic scalability settings target 30 frames per second on console budget. That is a bit optimistic, but it can be done. And the same with high target 60 frames on consoles. You have to do some trade-offs, but and then low and medium scalability settings just disable all the Lumen features, so I could not recommend them if you are going to use Lumen. And then I show you some tips and tricks. So I think we can move to Unreal. Have this scene here, and well, as you can see, we're already having here an issue, a problem. Let me disable static it. So the first thing I wanted to look at, and that's why I have these rotating cubes here, is how to optimize a directional light. Because it's not as easy as just make it affect less areas or avoid overlapping, because it just touches everything. So if we find the directional light, I'll show you the Lumen virtual shadow maps. So this is the clip map that we saw before. You just can find it here. Virtual shadow maps, clip map, or pages. But what I wanted to look is at the cache pages. I wanted you to know that what are the pages, because the way Unreal try to save performance is by not calculating shadows every frame. So there's two types of cache. So what it does is like it pre-saves the shadows in these cache pages, and unless something changes there, it just doesn't update the shadows. So what you can see here, for example, is these green pages are just not being modified. They are just not being recalculated. There's two types of cache pages. There's static and dynamic. The static ones, Unreal just store there everything it knows is not going to move. And in the dynamic one, stores the dynamic objects one. which means if the dynamic object doesn't move, it doesn't update. If the dynamic object moves, it just updates that one instead of having to update all the shadows in that page. So you can see here, for example, the dynamic cache is being invalidated because I have these cubes moving here. So what you can do is to disable, for example, this is really important for foliage. If you have like a lot of foliage or forest or something like that, you might want to disable world position offset in the distance. I'll show you how to. But for example, when you move the camera here, you can see that there's some red squares. And that's also because when the camera moves, everything that comes in the camera has to be recalculated. So also camera movement influence performance. If you are moving the camera faster, performance might get worse. Or if you move the light, for example, if I move this direction light, you can see everything gets red because the cache is being validated. So moving the direction light in a game is also not a great idea if you have performance issues. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Shadow caching. Oh yeah, sorry. I wanted to mention the foliage. So foliage, I have here this cookie because I didn't have any foliage to use. You can come here to instance settings, and then you have options here to, for example, let's make this bigger. Shadow caching validation behavior. So you can make it just static so the shadow of the foliage doesn't move. Rigid or always. Probably for small foliage is better if they don't cast shadows. And then I could leave it in auto, but you can adjust it here. For example, this value, world position as a disabled distance. This is you're not going to see anything because there's no foliage. But if you adjust this distance, after that distance, the foliage is going to stop moving, which is going to stop invalidating the cache, which is it's going to improve performance pretty heavily, probably, if you have a lot of, depending on the amount of foliage. But if you have like a lot of foliage, it has a great impact. So that's something to keep in mind when working on outdoor scenes, for example. And I think now we can just delete this directional light. That's everything I wanted to mention about caching, shadow caching. And now let's take a look at this scene. As you can see, performance is already not great. Okay. So this is a scene I got from the marketplace. I made it worse, so it looked great before. I just took some things, so I have an example to show you. So the first thing we can do is to enable probably stat unit graph. So as you can see, performance is not being great already. It's taking around 40 milliseconds if we don't move the camera, which is not hitting 30 frames per second. For 30 frames per second, you need 33 milliseconds, 33 milliseconds per frame, and for 60 you need 16.6. So we're not in budget, and also we're having this because there's too many lights overlapping, and also we're not even rendering at really high resolution. We're just in 63%, and I'm not even going full screen. So things are not great for now. So we can see even more the effect. We are going to force it to use at least 75% of the screen percentage. So that scaling is doing less work and performance is going to be worse. I have these cameras here that we can probably, that one, this one, or let's do this one. So you press Ctrl-Shift, you have the GPU visualizer will take a screenshot. I usually like to take two because the first one sometimes doesn't work properly. So here you can see this is how long the frame is taking. In this case, there's no any gameplay or any calculations other than lighting probably. So that's why this bar is so long. Usually you have more little bars for each thing that is being calculated. So I like to go and arrange this from more expensive to cheaper. And here you can see when you start unfolding, you can see where all the milliseconds are going. I don't know why the hair is being so expensive. I don't think we have any characters here, but probably, I don't know, there's some shader that is using some hair things. But for example, lighting is taking 10 milliseconds here. Post-processing, which is TSR, is using another 8. Volumetric fog, shadows. So from this camera angle, right now it's taking 55 milliseconds. So let's see if we can make it look better, maybe improve it. To start, what I like to do is first of all, you should convert every mesh that you can to nanite, because I've already done it in this environment because sometimes it just crashes, so I didn't want to do it live. But you should do it. It's just faster with Lumen. Lumen works pretty fast, much faster with nanite meshes that we know nanite meshes. And also the shadows look better. They work better in the distance. So there's no reason not to do it. And then once that's done, what I usually do is to check light overlapping. Alt-7 is your friend. And as you can see, it is horrible. You want to have maybe some red, maybe a bit of white, but not full white. White is bad. So we're going to try to improve these, and I'll show you some tricks how to do it. So for example, I think the main cause of we also have some red lights there that we will have to replace. But I think the main problem with this is these windows, because they have like a really long range. They are really wide, and they also are affecting the ones in the top floor are affecting the bottom floor. The ones in the bottom floor are affecting the top floor. So we're going to try to reduce that. If we go to the blueprint of the mesh, let's see. For a second, I thought it was going to crash. So in the spotlight, probably we can make this a bit smaller. It's difficult to do it with one screen, but let's try. I'll try to show everything. I think this one's a good example how to check, because you can see how much are they affecting this wall. So you can probably reduce the range and see how much change. For example, in this case, 750 is okay. It's not having a massive change. And probably we can also try to make the angle a bit smaller. Again, it's okay. It doesn't change dramatically the visuals, and hopefully performance is going to be better. Maybe we can even reduce it a little bit more. This is one option. Let's see how it's looking already. Alt-7. And this is already looking much better, but still can be improved. For example, as you can see here, this yellow part here is because the windows at the bottom and the windows in the top floor, they are overlapping, even if you cannot see them. So we have to take care of that. Before we do that, I also want to mention, this is one of the tips and tricks I have for you, and is that it's going to break the physicality of the lighting, but you can always go to advanced and disable the versus square fall off. This way you can reduce even further the range. Let's see. Too bright. Hit right. Fine. Okay, it's already looking better. So now maybe we can tweak this value here for
heavy, it could be set to a higher.
8 or 6. And with 6 we kind of have like a similar result. It's not, still we have some shaded area here that we can maybe tweak. We can increase this to 700, but the result is kind of similar. Again, the fall off is not realistic, but in many cases is worth the trade-off, because you can just make the range shows much smaller without much of a visual impact. So if we look now, it's better. We don't have any much red, but we still have plenty of orange, of white. So let's try to look into that. Also, I didn't mention, but we have some red lights here that probably we can remove and we can replace later. And all these spotlights, point lights that we have here, they are casting shadows, and probably we can disable them without a big impact. Usually point lights, even if they're really small, they tend to be quite expensive. So if you remove casting shadows, see, the impact is not massive because they're pretty small, and they're going to make everything cheaper. Say these. And the same for these ones. Let's see what impact they have, but because I prepare here. Okay. No, forgot to enable that level of an optimized lighting. So we have these point lights here. All of them are casting shadows. Probably we can remove them. And I'll show you later another way to do this. It's not great, but performance is much better too. So for example, here we can remove shadows. Again, it's not a massive change visually, but it will help performance. And now let's try to get rid of these white parts. So what we can do for that, the bottle. Don't crash. Performance is getting bad. I'm going to set this back to default. Hopefully that will help. Okay, so we're back. And for this window, for example, these two windows, we can tweak the distance cooling. So you select the lights. Spotlight. Let's see where we left it. I think we may have to tweak some of the things we did again, but looks like we didn't lose much. I think actually it's fine. We were just looking at how to improve these white areas that we have here. So the main problem why we have that is because these windows and these ones, even if they are not visible at the same time, they are affecting each other. So we can tweak the cooling distance of these lights here, for example. You can come here and you type distance. You have here max draw distance and max fade distance. That means max draw distance is the maximum distance the light is going to be drawn. So for example, if I set it to something small like 10, the light will disappear. And if you put it like 1000, it will be here, but it will just disappear once I'm 10 meters away. Well, let's make something smaller. Maybe. Okay. So as you can see, it's on or off. So for that, we have the distance fade, which is the distance at which it is going to start fading. So it's not a cut, it's more like a fade in or fade out. In some cases, it doesn't matter. Like, for example, this light, probably we don't need the fade distance, but it's good to have the option. So, for example, this light, we can just see it when we are, I think you just can see it from here, because if you go further, there's like a wall. So probably we set it up. If we set it up for something like, 10 meters. So for example, the light is not being rendered already, but you cannot now. For example, you can see there's a little bit of difference because the lighting is bouncing from the wall and now it disappears. We can add some fading there or increase this distance, but I think it's fine. And for example, if you look at here and you go a bit further, I'm not sure if it's doing much. Is it disappearing? Is it being rendered? I think so. Yeah, you can see there. For example, that light that you cannot see from here, it's already not affecting performance until you get close to it. And it's the same for these. We can do the same here. For this one, we might want to use the fade range. Let's try it again, 1000, and maybe we can start fading into 700. So, yeah, something like that. So, for example, now if we look here, you can see those two lights already. We are kind of removing a big part of that yellow when we are a little bit away. We can do the same with all these other windows. We can set them so these, just to make it quick. Nope. So again, you can see this is getting much more performant, actually. And we are removing a part of those white parts. One of the tips and tricks I had for you too, it's you can also use, let me show you, it's here. You can use emissive lights for, as I mentioned before, emissive lights affect lighting now. So you can use them hidden to add some of these lights. For example, if we remove these, now that we have these emissive areas here, emissive balls here, you can see it's still kind of warm. This is not ideal because, as you can see, it creates some artifacts sometimes, but it's an option. And this is basically free because it's part of the final gathering of Lumen. So having these balls here doesn't affect any performance, and you can do it really easily. It's just a normal emissive material, and you have to come here and just check hidden in game, and at the same time affecting their lighting while hidden. So even if it's hidden here, like in game mode, it will still be present. And we can even use that if we want to optimize this further. We can even use it in some windows, for example. Actually, before doing this, we are going to do it, but before, I wanted to show you megalights. You have to enable them. I think they're enabled by default in the project settings, but you also can control them per light and from the post-process volume. Megalights are basically a way to render lights with ray tracing instead of using, because in the normal render rastering mode, you have to calculate the shadows per light. So that's why the more lights you have, the more expensive they are. So with megalights, you just don't do that. You just using ray tracing, you calculate them all at the same time. So the thing with megalights is they have a base cost, and then it doesn't matter just by enabling, you have to pay the cost. And then it doesn't matter how many lights you have, the cost will be pretty much the same. So you can go to the post-process volume here, and I have them disabled. But you can go to megalights and enable them. And as you can see, there's some difference in the accuracy of the lights. They're less accurate, they're a bit more noisy. Sometimes they create some artifacts or some noise depending on the angle, but they are pretty cheap. I was looking at these to see if they do any difference, but I'm not sure at the moment. Let's see. So without them here, for example, let's do a screen capture. We have 22 milliseconds. If we want to measure this properly, we should change the scalability settings back to... Oh, no, they're epic already. It's only the screen percentage. Yes, increase it. Hope it doesn't crash again. So now we have 30 milliseconds. And if we enable them, we have 28. It's not a massive difference, but it's not even full frame. And it's a pretty small scene. If you have many more lights, that might make a big difference. Or if you have a bigger scene or that kind of things. So we can leave them on for now, because what we're going to do now, I'm going to show you that you can even use emissives. If you are really short in performance and you need to gain at all cost, you can just remove this light, and you can here, for example, a cube. Ideally, for these kind of things, for using emissives to lead as a light source, the bigger the better, and they have to be at least 10 centimeters thick. So Lumen catch them properly. So as you can see, we can static mesh here, and we go to hidden, and we enable affect lighting while hidden and hidden in game. And as you can see, we already have some lighting here, but there's no light. There's nothing there. As you can see, performance now. This view is much nicer, but it has some issues. Let's make this a bit brighter too. So this 3. Won't make much of a difference, actually. Now, here we are. As you can see, it looks okay, but the definition is lower. And also, when they go off screen, there's some artifacting, there's some noise around, but they're pretty cheap. So it's something you can keep in mind. Maybe not using for main light source like this, but for some ambient lighting like these or these is an option you can use. Another thing I wanted to look at is how to improve reflections or optimize them. I'm not sure if you noticed, but this floor is pretty glossy, and I did that on purpose because you go to Lumen and Performance Overview, you can see these red parts, and this is the reflections that requires like a specific lumen rays to calculate the reflections. So you have two ways to fix this. Like the red part is the most expensive part. You want the less red as possible, so you can reduce the roughness of your materials, or you can also adjust this in the post-process volume. You can go to distance or roughness. Yeah, max distance to trace, to roughness to trace. And this is the minimum, the max roughness that is going to be calculated, used for a specific rays. So for example, if you make this lower, the red goes away, and it's going to improve performance too. The reflections are going to be less accurate, but in this case, for example, which is a rock, you cannot really tell. You have a puddle, something like that, you might not want to do that. But in this case, for example, now it's more optimized. I don't really see any difference. Oh yeah, there's a difference, but it's nothing dramatic. So it can be improved like that way. And we can take a look also to scalability settings, which right now I am on high. What is it? Peak scalability, have a peak. So you can reduce them until high. I could not go lower than that because that disables Lumen. They do a bunch of things. Usually just reduce quality and accuracy, but performance should be better. Well, as you can see here, for example, this is got disabled. It's a bit less accurate, and I think that's pretty much it. We can take a look also to the camera we took at the beginning, not this one, and see how much if we gain any performance, which we did. It was like 50 something before, right? And now it's 23. This is like a bit heavy optimization because we're not even using light for the windows or anything like that. But as you can see, it works. And that's a wrap. I think I've gone over everything I wanted to go. Did you have any questions?
Hello everybody, thank you so much for sitting through that whole workshop. That is amazing. Can I also remind you to subscribe if you liked it? If you don't, feel free to add a comment, so that we can know what to improve in the future. Just a couple of things from my side. If you want to take your environment art to the next level, there's actually a link to our community in the description where you can join. You get a free PDF that is like 250 pages long. You also get access to these workshops, and you can be there with like the live Q&A. And there's a whole bunch of other resources that we're creating as well. So if you want to take your art to the next level, feel free to join us in our lovely community, and I hope to see you there.